Welcome to the Ashtanga Dispatch Podcast. I'm Mulqueen, your host. This season, I'll be bringing you engaging and interesting conversations amongst various teachers. I call them chats around the campfire because that's where all the best conversations take place. You know, somewhere in the backcountry without any other distractions. Just friends amongst friends sitting around a campfire, telling stories beneath the stars. Anyway, it's just an idea. In reality, we are still sitting around our computers, but in a way that's less formal and structured, a little bit more spontaneous and real. And with me for this friendly chat are actual friends, David Keil, Jen René, and Scott Johnson. David Keil is probably best known as that anatomy guy. His workshops and book and online courses are a staple amongst yoga teachers and students alike. But what you may not know is David was also my very first Mysore teacher. You could say he's the one who got me hooked. And it was because he treated me like an individual. He was even playful in his approach, which is not something I'd experienced Ashtanga yoga teachers to be. That was almost 20 years ago, and since then, David has been both mentor and my very good friend. Jen René is another one of my closest friends and someone, incidentally, I have been camping with. She was with me back when Ashtanga Dispatch began, nearly 20 years ago. In fact, it was Jen, I think, who thought of the name. We were both living in Washington, D.C., where Jen had just started her own Mysore program. And we were both trying to make Mysore feel more inviting because that was not really the vibe that Ashtanga yoga had back then. Maybe it still doesn't. Maybe that's why we keep trying, me through this podcast and Jen through her online teaching platform, Ashtanga Central. Scott Johnson, I met more recently. Now, he and David Keil have been good friends for a long time, and maybe that's why when I met Scott, he seemed so familiar. I felt comfortable. We hit it off immediately. In fact, sometimes I say if I were ever to be blessed with a brother, I imagine he would be Scott Johnson, or like him. Scott's sweet and kind and creative, and yeah, he's just a great teacher and now a great friend. Scott is also the co-founder and director of Still Point Yoga in London and the host of his own podcast, Still Points, which I highly recommend. Our subject for this Around the Campfire chat was one that David and Scott had originally brainstormed for Scott's podcast, but I borrowed it. Is Ashtanga yoga right for everyone? Now, a little spoiler here, I'm not sure that we ever really answered the question. But in asking, it opened up a lot of really interesting dialogue. Like, what do we even mean by Ashtanga yoga? We talked about misconceptions around the method and practice, the need for critical thinking, and how the structure can be both supportive and limiting. In any case, I think that's what a great question does. It often just leads to more questions. And the one we kept circling back to was this: how can we be better teachers? And that right there is a question I hope we'll always be asking. Here's David, Scott, Jen, and me. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see your faces. And Jen and Scott, you're just meeting each other, yeah? You're just meeting each other for the first time.
Yeah, we haven't met.
And David, when's the last time you saw her? When's the last time you saw Jen?
It's been years. Yeah, probably
Yeah.
10 years or so.
It's been a long
Yeah,
time.
close.
Do you remember the picture of the three of us in handstand?
That was a good one.
I remember that.
There's a picture of the three of you in handstands.
Us.
Yeah, it's a good picture.
That goes that gets put on the video right now.
It was fun. I remember that.
Well, I have to credit David and Scott for coming up with the topic, because this was something that they were kind of tossing around as a discussion point. And when David brought it up, it was something that Megan and I have been talking about a lot. It seems so relevant. Is Ashtanga yoga right for everyone? And I will say, I go back and forth, like I'm not one for absolutes, the whole everyone or never or always. But also, I feel like I'm gonna feel like I want to turn it over to you and ask you the question before, because I want to kind of hear what you have to say first. What do you think, David?
Um, well, I'm a big fan of context, and I can appreciate, the difficulty in trying to answer this question because if we take the perspective of like the most traditional version of it, or a complete beginner showing up to a lead class, or it starts to feel very unapproachable for a whole swath of people. Which, of course, isn't true if it's a Mysore and somebody's approaching from the first day and they only do, sun salutations and maybe a couple of standing postures, maybe. So it all depends on, um, you know, the context that somebody's entering. But I think that the driving sort of thing behind the question is like how Ashtanga is perceived makes it feel very not good for everyone. You know what I mean? Because like they feel like they're gonna have to show up and be able to do everything from day one, which unfortunately and realistically is completely ridiculous. So it really depends. But there's more nuance to go into.
I mean, there is so much nuance to it. It depends what we mean by Ashtanga yoga. If we're kind of like, this the context, right? What is the Ashtanga yoga we're talking about? If we're talking about the current modality as it's shared, is that right for everyone to follow that, like, through the sequences of Ashtanga? Or if we were looking at Ashtanga yoga more as a model of movement and practice that's available to us, is that appropriate for me? Is that appropriate for everyone? So I think what David mentioned, or when we look at the Mysore style, when you look at that model, how do we make it available, I suppose? And when we're calling it Ashtanga yoga, what are we actually calling? What are we actually asking people to do? And I think it's that context which I'm enjoying, like how we're going to kind of ease out when we actually say, what is it that we're practicing?
I mean, I totally hear you there. Like, I hear about that part. I'm wondering, though, in practicality, just actually looking at it first as just a physical practice, like actually the physical practice. Have you ever had a student that you just really didn't think, in a physical sense, it was right for? Just wondering.
Well, so I'll answer that one. I had a student who actually, I thought she was doing a really good job with it, but we were making a lot of adaptations and modifications. But I mean, she'd been practicing with me for probably close to 5 years, and I really thought she was doing well. And then but she was injured a lot, and like it was not easy for her. And I don't know how good it felt on a regular basis. Like, I think probably a lot of the times she was practicing more out of a sense of obligation, or because like you're supposed to practice every day, and maybe not so much because she was really enjoying it or getting a lot of personal benefit from it. And then, it felt like out of the blue, but she wrote me and she just said, like, I'm not going to do Ashtanga anymore. Like, I'm maybe in a few years I'll come back, but like I want to do other things. I'm done with Ashtanga. And it did kind of sting, like, like, I hate to see people quit, even when in her case, I think it really was probably the right move. Um, but I felt like I had maybe failed her as a teacher, or the practice had failed her, but like, after I kind of like, I remember talking to Paul, my husband, about it. And I was like, but you know what? Like, I think she's right. Like, I don't think it's the right practice for her, even though we tried really hard to make it work. There probably are other things that would work for her that are better.
I think you could like kind of create a category of people who it's less likely to be good for, let's say. Like, um, if they come in with limited, like really limited mobility or strength, or injuries like having slip discs and unable to get off the floor from the start, that's kind of a barrier to entry anyway. So in that sense, I would say, yeah, that it's going to be very difficult to make it work for those people.
And then now as a rebuttal, I'm going to say, just on the other side of it, a lot of times, like I will be really creative and students want to follow it really conventionally. And you're like making adaptations and you're trying to be creative and they're like, not right. It's not, this isn't it. And they get real frustrated. Anybody else have that kind of experience?
Yeah. Well, because we're presented with this image on it that we see with social media or whatever we're seeing, even, maybe in another MISO room, whatever, that it's supposed to look a certain way. And it's really it's really more about the experience and how it feels. But we don't see that. Like we see the external, we see the outside of yoga. We can't show somebody the inside of yoga. They have to figure that one out on their own.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, the outside. Yeah, it is. It's the way you look at it. And it does look linear. It does look, 1, 2, 3.
I mean, it is.
I guess it is, yes. But,
it is.
but does it have to be?
I mean, does it have to be? I mean, I spend most of my time, and I learned from, David's been a friend of mine and teacher for years, and we spend most of our time trying to, like you yourself, like looking at people's patterns and saying what's helpful and like how effective is this movement? And if you have a practice already, if you're coming with a practice, how can you move more effectively? How can you move with more awareness? And most of the time, I'm meeting people who who are coming with that kind of those ideas. And more often than not, you're bringing people coming who have maybe got some kind of pattern that's like of discomfort and something like that. And you're meeting them, and rather than saying, well, just skip that, we're actually working with them and going, well, what's the functional way of or what's a good way of approaching what you're noticing and feeling? So for me, it's more about helping people, that gain of entry, when people are entering into the practice and they're in the spirit of it, of saying, how can you practice this with the most awareness, with the most effectiveness, with the most way that you can feel like that it's doing something powerful in relationship to the way that you're moving, in the way that you're noticing your breath, the energy of your body, all of these different ways that, like for me, when we talk about Ashtanga yoga, I'm thinking about the more way that we become aware of the way we're practicing, right? And I think what Jenny was pointing to is this is the way we see things, and we see they look a certain way. And I think when we bring people into our classrooms and our workshops, we're trying to say, actually, feel it, feel yourself doing it. And for me, when we talk about Ashtanga being for everyone, it's the container from which people draw the practice from them, which I find the most interesting, where the movement of the practice, where the vinyasas come from, that I spend most of my time and most of my workshops addressing with people. So for me, there's a sense that the awareness of what someone's actually doing and feeling and experiencing is more what I'm helping people to, what I'm trying to feel in myself and helping people to explore.
But is it linear?
No. I mean, there is a set sequence, right? You go the prime, you go the intermediate. But if you have your person come and you're teaching them they come with discomfort. What are we doing with how are we helping people, or what are we doing with that?
Sometimes I find the beginning of second series is way more accessible than primary series. What do you think?
Well, I was just gonna, say, I mean, sure, in the container is linear, like in a general sense, in the outermost edges of it, sure. And to Scott's point, there's plenty of spaciousness inside of that to go in all kinds of directions and point out all sorts of things to people. And of course, trying to get them to embody the practice and be poses rather than do poses and all of that kind of good stuff. But you, in order to experience that aspect of the practice, you have to have adopted, in this case, the sequence in order to let it go so that you know what's next and you can actually explore the sensation of moving. Otherwise, you're just lost in what's next or what movement. There's no way to feel what's happening if you're thinking about all of that stuff. So the linearness is there as a framework to then let go of, like most things that end up becoming sort of empty, you know, and not having, you know, just disappearing in a sense, you know. I mean, like, right, we do the sequence and it doesn't even occur to us what's next. It doesn't, there's no thought
Mm.
about what we're going to do next. It's automatic, which means we can focus on breath or all of the other elements or any of the other elements or all at once if possible, which is, of course, ideal. But that's what I was going to say about
it. Several years ago, like I think it was in 2019, it was a while ago. I had like a series of injuries and migratory joint pain, and like I hadn't felt good in practice for a while. I think I had a stress fracture in my back. Like there was a lot of stuff that all of a sudden happened at once. And I was had signed up for a retreat with David Garrigues, and I was like, oh man, like, you know, and he's a good one to work with when you have stuff going on. But like part of me was kind of embarrassed because I hadn't seen him for a few years, and my practice had like, you know, like all of a sudden I couldn't do so many things. Like I was really not feeling very good in practice. And I talked to him about it, and he said something that was super useful, and I've like gone back to it so many times, but he just told me to make a list of all the poses that I think I can do and I want to do from like all, you know, any series, and just focus on those things and omit everything in between that wasn't working. And I mean, for me, that was like, it was so helpful because like the list was actually still really long. Like I could still do so many things. There was so many things that I could still work on and work with. And then I just, you know, like took out the ones that were aggravating my pain. And it gave me like a really nice framework to practice with it. But at the same time, it was kind of available because I had spent a lot of time going through the linearness of the practice. But it's also, you know, like it's really easy to share that with other people too, because I think like when you kind of like think about it, you know, you find that there's still a lot available, and like you don't have to do the other stuff. Like there's no one's going to make you.
I think I really love this idea of like, you know, when it's so, is it good for everyone? Like, what does good mean, and who is everyone? You know what I mean? It's like,
Well,
it's
you
so
know what?
like...
That's a really good question, because I think Jen and I were actually chatting on the phone while I was walking the puppy the other day, and I was saying to her, I think the ones that I don't think it's really, so sometimes I do encourage them not to. It doesn't have to do with physical, but the ones that are real pushers and like achievers, and so like Scott, you're like, well, what does good mean? Well, it might be good for them because it'll sort of kind of come to terms with some of that, because everybody hits a place when they're, you know, when they're faced with something you can't do, or you know, you're faced with that. But then at the other hand, depends on how determined and like strong, as you were saying before, that pattern is, and you know, how hurt they might get as they go on that kind of path. I don't know.
I was actually going to ask a question to the group about this idea of, because it occurred to me, and especially you just touched on it in a slightly different way, but like, is there this like group of people that I would say it's not that it's not for them, although I don't know what your opinion will be, but maybe it slides towards like, let's be extra careful here. The person who pushes a lot, or the perfectionist tendencies, right? Sometimes those are together, sometimes they're separate. And also like body image, and you know, like this slightly more psychological tendencies, like maybe that's a different direction as opposed to the physical part. Like, what is that group like, and how do we manage that? Or is there any group that it is not for? Has anybody come across anybody psychologically in that sense, or those tendencies as personalities to like, I mean, nobody's just told somebody, hey, this isn't for you, get out of here.
I think it goes back to what Jen said, was that we get this idea in our head, and students get an idea in their head, and me as a student has gotten an idea in my head of what something should look like based on my image of it and even how it's portrayed.
I think there's this idea that, like you say, if you had a student, and maybe it's, come back to what Dave was talking about, you had a student come in to your Mysore room, and and it isn't right. If you had you had someone come in and you can just see that it's, I mean, I've got my longest private, I've got one private student, and she was sent to me from one of my old Ashtanga yoga students about 8 years ago, and she rang me up. I was put forward as someone she could work with. She rang me up and said, I've been told that you're the only person who can help me. I'm like, really? I'm an Ashtanga teacher. And she was in her early 70s, and she walked, and I said, I'll come and meet you. And she walked into the room, and she had this scoliosis like this, like really curved. And she's 70, and I'm thinking, there's no way we're doing Ashtanga. Because of the very way that the way her body was. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to teach her something called Ashtanga, but I would be able to focus on the aspects which would be like to be able to focus, to be able to breathe with awareness, and to kind of direct her energy to within her body. So there's the Tristana method, right, which is breath, bandha, and drishti, which was important for her. And then we kind of understood how to move with awareness and presence. But when it came to understanding the practice of Ashtanga, or the sequential nature, there was no way she was going to be able to do it. She couldn't even begin to touch her hands on the floor and get down. But there were principles which were available to her that were helpful. And she's never been able to do a sun salute, but we do poses like Shalabhasana, and we do kind of remedial stuff. And it's really helped me. Over the years, it's helped, working with her has helped me so much to be able to help other people, to show if we're in a room and someone has some scoliosis. I mean, we did this with Fiona in this certain way. And so someone comes in with a practice and they're limited in a certain way. I've gone through over the last 7 years in the remedial stuff I've done with Fiona, the ability to help someone in the Mysore practice. But what I found was I wasn't able to help her, but there were other small practices and techniques which were within Ashtanga, which was more like the focus stuff, which was helpful and available to her, and which was just over the years been really supportive of her living with a really a really full-on scoliosis. So we're right in relationship to the physical nature, I think, with certain people, but with the heart of it, I think, for me. Like if she walked into my Mysore room and there was all the other, I would still show her the stuff and want her to do the stuff that we taught, but it wouldn't be the classic form of Ashtanga yoga. There's that linear sequence, which I think we're discussing.
I know I got real practical in the beginning, but Bobby Joyce was like Ashtanga yoga. Patanjali's Ashtanga yoga is Ashtanga yoga. I mean, it's just hard to go from something that is very practical and sequential to something that is like actually yoga, beyond all of it. I don't know.
But, keep in mind that, supposedly his test from Krishnamacharya was to take sick people and make them well through yoga. They didn't do primary, second, third, fourth, etc. And John Scott reported the same thing his first trip. The locals were showing up the earliest to Patabi Joyce and doing all kinds of different postures and pranayamas and whatever based on them. And then the Westerners would show up and they'd get the sequence because they were young, fit, and healthy. So,
or maybe that's the way our minds work too. And maybe that's like teaching to the people, this is a language we understand.
Yes. Hopefully.
I mean, we want to think it's good for everyone. We do, because we love it so much. You know, you want to think like when someone comes in your room that you be able to support them in some way. I always think that. I always, when someone comes into my room, I'm always going, how can I help? You know, how can I help you with what I know, within the framework of what we have? Even like when, you know, even when it's really interesting because we get people come in and like, maybe they've got some things going on and something's happened and they're working with a physiotherapist and they've got exercises they need to do. And this is something I learned from David. You know, I try and say, well, how can the practice support the work that you're doing with the physiotherapist in a way that helps you to kind of, you know, alleviate what's going on or deal with that thing. And I always love that, not challenge, but I always love to see how can the practice support what's going on for people, or a version of the practice, a continuum that's kind of helpful for whatever's going on with someone, and how that can help them.
I read this study in the education department, and they were talking about why kids, it does apply, I promise, why kids don't come out of school, don't graduate with critical thinking skills. One of the things was, number one, teachers focus too much on memorization. So it's a lot of memorization and regurgitation of what you've memorized. So that right there doesn't leave a lot of room for critical thinking skills. Two, and that applies for sure, I think, in a certain respect. But also this one is the one that really got me. How wed that teachers, when they're getting their enrichment, you know, their graduate courses, it's a lot on subject and content, but not a lot on how to teach. And so what ends up happening is they become very focused on the content, and there is a certain level of confirmation bias that's associated with that. The more immersed and attached you are to the content, the less likely you are to question as a teacher, thereby your own critical thinking skills are lost. And this was in the education realm, but it really applied in my mind. I thought, you know, to me, I'm like, well, there are a lot of people that will say, and you didn't say this, Scott, so I think this is really interesting. I love Ashtanga yoga. It changed my life. It will change yours. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Like I teach because I love Ashtanga yoga. And I'm thinking, oh man, maybe that's not a good reason. That's not the best reason to teach.
What it makes me think of is to add to the confirmation bias and all this stuff that limits one's ability to kind of break the mold or whatever it is this is how I learned it, so this is how I'm going to teach it. I learned it the right way, so I'm going to teach it that same way because that's the right way. You know, I mean, there- so it's like to me like what I always when I went to my mentor, I was given the direction to watch how the teaching happens. What is taught as a primary, not the sequence, but how the actual teaching happens. And then you realize that there's modifications done all the time, uh, poses emitted all the time, all kinds of variation going on. And that people were given in different instructions from Patabi Joyce of how they should practice. And then unfortunately, all those people didn't pay attention to how everybody got something different, a different instruction, and they go and they leave and they're like, oh, well, he told me this was the right way to practice, so therefore that must be the right way to teach. And they missed that whole part of how it was different for everyone, unfortunately.
I remember you telling that story. That's always made an impression on me. I've always thought that was so helpful, so good.
Very useful for me.
Super useful. Because if you can't teach to the person, I mean, you have to really approach everyone individually and teach to the person in front of you. And if you can't do that, then Ashtanga will never be a good fit for everyone.
So I had an interesting experience that kind of got like, so I was teaching in a Mysore room earlier this year, and two different students came. One student did not practice Ashtanga. She practiced something else, but wanted to come to the morning self-practice. She had a self-practice. And another person came with a chair and wanted to practice her chair yoga. And it was so funny that both these students came, and I'm just like, so I remember, okay, very practically, very logistically. So I said to them both separately, and I said, oh, you are so welcome to come in and practice whatever it is you practice. Absolutely. I won't necessarily know where you need help because I won't know. It's not a language I'm well versed in. But you can call me over and you can teach me what it is you need for me to do or not do. And with both, actually, I mean, especially with the chair yoga, she goes, I know what to do. I don't really need any, I've got my chair, I know what I'm doing, and I just want to kind of go through and be with the group. And I was like, oh, so afterwards I said to her, thank you so much for doing that. I would never, I didn't mean to sound awkward. Like I wouldn't know. I've never done chair yoga. I wouldn't know how to help, but I was really happy that you felt comfortable enough to bring what you needed with you. And she said, I'll be honest with you. After this, she goes, I was thinking about leaving Ashtanga yoga. And she goes, and I'm not. She said, that was really important for me to know that I could come. And it was a moon day. And when you get scheduled for workshops, it was a moon day. And that's what she practiced on her moon days. That's what she wanted to do. And it was fine. And I was honest. I won't necessarily know. I don't know chair yoga. But as long as you're comfortable in asking me for whatever you need. But I just thought, I've never had that happen to me before. And I just thought it was cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting with that when people come and practice other things. In other words, because I remember a friend of mine years ago, Joey Miles, used to say, I would love to have a Mysore room or just a self-practice room where everyone came and practiced actually what they wanted to practice. Because there's always been it would be a bit kind of like, you'd have to work out how to be able to have a bit chaotic, but there is something about people like, can I practice something else? It's not going to disturb the room. I've always heard that, like, if I do something different, it's going to disturb the room. And I always say, like, don't worry, everyone's kind of, focused on themselves anyway. I think I really love it when people come and they explore. Interestingly, I get quite a few people come and do the new Black Lotus, the new Thailandrum thing. And I'm just going, yeah, of course, I don't know how can I help you, but if you need some help, let me know, that kind of thing. And so I think it's nice. I mean, going back to this, like, when we say, like, is Ashtanga yoga good for everyone, we can only talk about the people that we meet, the everyone that we meet, right? And this is what you were talking, Jen, about, like, the people that come into our room and we engage with, there are everyone. They are our everyone, and there's everyone in your room, David, and your room, Pegs, and your room, Jen, and they're your everyone. So, like, as our friend David, you never generalize. You can always go, what is good for you right now? What does good mean? What does good mean in this moment as we're kind of relating? What's next? What does it feel like? And I think for me, that's kind of as we're drawn into this conversation. The everyone is the people that I meet. And, everyone is someone who's going to come in and I'll go, yeah, let's try. And if not, then, like you said, Jen, your student was like, naturally, it's not. And there's an honesty and there's a, which I like about that. And then, we tried. And some people feel like, oh, no, I really would like, I got someone who, and she's worked with David over the years in Still Point, but she comes and she's got a long-term sit bone pain and hamstring pain. And so she's kind of tried to give up, but not, and we found this way from her to continue a form of Ashtanga yoga, which is like sometimes part primary, sometimes part intermediate, which supports her being able to have a form of practice, of yoga practice. And that comes, and we talk about this kind of like being able to teach in a certain way where you understand that the practice is more important perhaps than this linear kind of like process. I think what David said, we have to have like a linear practice to be able to let go of it. So there is an element of like understanding and feeling and sensing over the years so that you can begin to make the choices based on what you're feeling and understanding. So yeah, like that idea of everyone is the everyone in my life I can like, could work with.
And that's what I think so important as a teacher, because I never want to turn somebody away who wants to do Ashtanga just because they struggle with primary or they can't bind something or they can't do a drawback. Like I don't care about any of those individual things, or poses, or like I never want to be a gatekeeping teacher, and I never want to think about gateway poses. And if somebody wants to practice, like I make it my job to figure out a way to help them do that. And I don't, we can pull from different series, we can pull from different practices. It doesn't have to all be straight up Ashtanga poses even. But I mean, I think it's the most important thing is to give students something that makes them want to keep coming back.
I just think it's lovely what you just expressed, because it was going to go into a question I was going to go into, because I was like, maybe the question that we had asked in the beginning wasn't the best. Like, how is Ashtanga the best for, the best practice for everyone, not good for everyone? Because is it the best? I don't know. I think that could definitely be debated, but maybe how could we do it better? And what you just described is definitely that.
I was going to say, it reminded me of like even at a pose level, like there's the practice, and then is this pose good for this person with this particular issue or whatever that is? And then it's like, more nuances like, well, is the way they're doing this pose what's good for them, or best for them is even better way to say it. And, I had this interaction this past weekend with a student, and I started asking her questions. Well, like, what about this and this? And have you tried this and da da da? And, you know, maybe this isn't, maybe you shouldn't do this right now. Or like all of these like questions around what her experience was. And she's like, those are the questions I ask myself all the time. I said, okay, so then you have an answer. She's like, well, no, because I thought I had to do it this way.
Yeah, that conformity is so embedded in us, that
Yeah.
need to that need to conform.
Look, I pulled out my classic line. I'm like, well, you look like an adult to me. You are you familiar with being an adult? Like you have agency here. You know, I mean, the thoughtfulness was there around it. It was the feeling like it was appropriate to do that in an Ashtanga class, in
Yeah,
a
that's
Mysore setting, which was like, I'm like, but it's me. And this is somebody who I've worked with, and you know me. I don't care about any of that stuff. Like, I mean, there's some edge somewhere, and when you hit it, don't worry, I'll say something. But like, really, this is an open conversation. I don't know what it's like to live in your body.
I always say that I'm only an expert on my body. That's the only body, and I'm even not even always an expert there, but but I rely on other people to tell me their experience, because I can't know. What I've always appreciated about you is that I know you were like teasing yourself, like, be an adult, right? Practice like an adult, but that's leaving room, and that's not something I'm gonna say. I don't know how present that is. And going back to that education model. So they did a study follow-up. How do you teach critical thinking skills? Then how
Mm.
do you do it? And one of them is by just what you said. It's asking them questions. How does that feel for you? So putting it back there instead of giving answers all the time, but actually giving people questions and letting them work with those questions, that helps build critical thinking skills. How do we get a self-practice? If we can't really think critically about our bodies and what we're doing with them.
Yeah, I said I'm not a dictator, so
I think what I love David when you share that. That's been such a boon for me over the years. That idea we're all adults in the room, right? Which is, but what it points to, what I kind of like love it points to is there's a sense of maturity. There's a maturation of the practice, right? And so I think this is what we're pointing to: is how are we maturing in relationship to the practice, and how we relate, and how it relates to us, and how we're relating to it. And I think, we quite a lot of MISO rooms don't have that, aren't set up with that kind of inquiry, this conversational aspect that we have, that we endorse to a certain degree in our rooms. It's more like we stay quiet, you don't say too much, and so there's that kind of like you're not able to have the interactions that we do, that we like, that I know that we like so much, to which are really fresh, and where you can actually ask and lean into that. So I think there's something about that that's really important for me, is like when we talk about it being good, is especially when you're teaching it, you're wanting to, I always want to, I'm the same, I'm wanting to know. If I know, then that helps me to help you, you know what I mean, to understand. And but there's rooms and there's that where that's not available to people. So I think that what comes to back to that idea, what David was talking about, that idea that, well, maybe I'm not allowed to, that kind of thing, that kind of like that thing. And I think that's maybe where people can get a little bit despondent, perhaps, where they're well, I've learned to try and listen to people, because that helps me to help them. When actually, if you're not being listened to and they're just being, that's not there, then you just go, oh, and then the people do slowly fall away, because that is, something's not being held. So I think there's something to, like, when we talk about, again, this idea of good for everyone, it's the way that what does good mean to someone, and how are we meeting that? How are we meeting what that is for someone, and what isn't good, and what is good, right? So for me, like that idea of the adult is how is our practice maturing? If we were to look at it over a period of time, where am I now with it? What do I notice? How am I with it? And I think if we asked ourselves these questions more, that would be really helpful.
Well, I have changed the way I teach now. I do two things, and both. One was Megan insisting that I do it, and so the first thing I do is, before I teach, I tell everyone that I have trouble hearing, that I wear hearing aids, and so that they have to speak loudly to me. And then if I don't respond, you can do a little hand wave, because I can't hear anymore as well. But also too, that to make it up front and not wait, and say, if there is anything that doesn't feel right for you, please call me over. Like, I'm here actually just for you. So we'll figure out something together. And now, it could be something, I don't say, it could be skip, it could be something different, it could be whatever. But like making that announcement up front that says, I'm welcoming. If something, it's like you're David, I'm going to take another one of the things you say, looking for the exception. If this is something that isn't working for you, definitely take advantage of me here, and I love these things. Let's put our brains together. We'll figure it out. But by inviting it in the beginning, I feel like does something to counter some of the belief systems that you kind of come in with, maybe? I don't know. I hope. That's my hope.
It's a nice way to start practice, though, because it gives people the opportunity to ask for help, to do things differently, to not push. And sometimes, and everyone needs that reminder. I mean, it doesn't really matter how experienced or inexperienced you are. It's a really good reminder.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, it is.
What this is all reminding me of is like that when we talk about is it for everyone, there's like this other version of it. It's like, is everyone going to last? And it seems to me, but I'm biased, of course, because in the way that I do things, but that rigidity, just going back, using that example, and this is an experienced practitioner, somebody who's finished second series and has been given the first couple poses of third. It's like when you're not free to ask those questions or to consider things and then try them, that rigidity at some point is like starts to become a weight on
Mm.
the shoulders. Like I don't know. Yeah, I'm open to hearing. Like, does that become a burnout sort of component, or and this sense of openness and stuff in the room, which of course it's a slippery slope at some point. Where you can't have everybody doing all kinds of craziness. There should be a method or reason. It's like when I meet people and I'm like, I'll just say, why are you doing this? And I try to consciously not make it a judgmental, why are you doing this?
Right.
Because my next question is, okay, is it working? It's working. Okay, I'm not going to do a thing. It's not working. Okay, then why are we doing this? Right? It's like then the space is there to then make a change or try something different. But just back to this idea of like, okay, is it for everybody? Yeah, sure. It is for everybody in some sense. And there's a few exceptions. And then how do you last? Like that part I find interesting as well. We'll see what happens.
Well, it's so funny because I can say for other students, how we can be creative and adaptive, but I had my own Jen moment, which you were describing earlier. And it was, when I had stopped practicing third series completely, when, in midlife, and then got so far away from it, it seemed so far away from me. And then practice just sort of got a little dull. I hate to say it like that, but I was losing strength. So then I started adding other things like a little bit of strength training, a little bit of, and I was like, and meanwhile, I would never tell somebody that just because they couldn't do it the way they used to do it, at one point, or the way they think they should do it, that they shouldn't at all, that they shouldn't approach something at all, that they shouldn't do what you said, Jen. What postures actually are accessible in there? Can you make a list, or can you and which ones maybe not? And it didn't even occur to me after 20 some odd years of practice that was something that was available to me until another student who was going through midlife was approaching third series. And I realized there are a lot of postures in there, actually, a side plank. There are some postures in there that are actually really important. And so I went through and I was like, how can I practice differently? How can I apply my own, belief system to myself and kind of go through with that? And you don't even realize that those things are buried in you. You don't until you're faced with them. And I do think in that regard, it's nice that we have a practice that does that, that might do a little bit, that not only gives us tools, but also kind of challenges those belief systems. And definitely that was a really nice, it's been a good learning. I'm still in the midst of it. It's been a really good learning experience for me. But third series is one of those that we've always put that kind of, it's only for performance or only for, it's, whatever. But actually there's some postures in there that are really strength building, and they've been really good for my body to make sure that I keep them in some capacity, but different.
So Peg, you're saying that you kind of like are able to now pick like things that are helpful for you from the third series, but maybe you don't practice full third series anymore. So, but you pick them and you choose them because they're helpful.
Definitely some of the postures in there that I don't do, but I have learned to get kind of creative and then realizing that there are postures in second series that look a lot like the ones I'm not going to do in third series. So maybe I just kind of put that one in there because it's the same sort of idea. Or maybe I use, in Natarajasana, I use a strap, or I do it a different way. Megan recently had hurt her hip, and her hip was just bothering her. She didn't hurt it. It's just really, really bothering her. She took out all leg behind the head. She took it all out for a year. And she thought to her, she didn't know what that was. And, she's in her 30s and she's like doing that. And then she came back to it recently. She thought it was going to be terrible. She was like, it was wonderful. Like I actually needed that break. I needed to not do that for a year to actually, I was so proud of her that she just did that herself and was able, that's what I'm talking about being able to think about it. And a lot of people might force something because of that, belief system that's there. But to answer your question, Yeah, I look, I do, there's some I don't do, there's some that I do differently, and some that I do just the way I always did pretty much. Yeah.
I mean, you don't
But,
want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like there's so much, I mean, because there's so much value in each series, but to go through it pose by pose is really limiting. After we've been doing this for such a long time, we just don't appreciate how hard so much of it is. Like Surya Namaskara B is super hard. It's really hard for new people. It's super hard as a pregnant person. Like
that's what I was going to ask you. Are you
It's
talking
so
as a pregnant
hard.
person?
It's so
It is
hard.
so hard when you're pregnant. I agree.
It's
I
really,
felt the
really,
same way.
I had a nightmare.
but like you don't but like so like Surya Namaskara B I don't want to do, but like I can still practice. I cannot do Surya Namaskara B. Like it's really okay.
Hmm.
But like we do that with it's easy to do that with a series too. A third is too hard. Okay, well, but the parts of it are great.
After you've been a practitioner and you understand the poses and all of that, and of course, that makes total sense. I mean, I think it's even in like the survey we did, most people who were 20 plus years of practitioners did some mix of primary, second, third series. That nobody was following the sequence exactly that way, because you know your body, you know the sequence, you know the poses, you know the poses, you know how they affect you, you know what they feel like, you know what your body's doing because you're so embodied at that point if you've been doing this for that long, and you do your thing.
So
You don't have
here's
to
an
do that
interesting,
thing.
yeah. So here's an interesting thought experiment with all of these kind of little variations of us being able to pick that from there, and that we are doing it because we practice for long enough, and we can, and it's being helpful for us. Are we doing Ashtanga yoga? Even though it's not in the linear sequential pattern, are we doing Ashtanga yoga? And I think that's the big. I think this is the big question. It's like, what is it that we're doing, even though we're taking that apart and we're doing that, and that's helpful for there then, is it's not the kind of thing, all of it, like you said, David, I was going to say, like, people, a lot of the older generation we speak to do take all those bits out, take a bit from there, bit from there, bit from there.
Because
It's Ashtanga yoga, right?
of course, because I've said this many times to people, I'm like, if you think Ashtanga yoga is doing the poses in order, then you're missing the plot. It's doing that while maintaining breath, bandha, and dristi, doing Tristana. So whatever you're doing, in whatever postures you're doing, in whatever order with Tristana is just as equally valid as the component that is just doing it in the set sequence. Because it
Yeah, but
isn't just the poses.
isn't that vinyasa flow, David?
Don't try to bait me, Scott.
You're
Don't do
doing
it.
it with you're
Well, I will tell you, I had to put my money where my mouth was. When the last time when I practiced with Shrat in Miami, it was a really hard time for me because India died, because my dog had died, and it was really. I saw you, David, and I think I might have even
Hmm.
told you, and I didn't even know if I was going to go, and I was feeling very fragile, and I was feeling awful. But I wanted to go. I felt that need to, I wanted to see him and I wanted to practice with him. But I also made a promise to myself that I would actually practice what I needed to practice and not practice. So that meant I was going to do things differently. And it meant that I put in, like I did do Setu Bandhasana, I did Shalabhasana, and I didn't do Bajasana. So I mean, like I actually mixed a few things up, and nobody said, like, you think that somebody's going to say something. You think somebody's going to like point a finger. And there was this like little thought to myself, I was a little nervous. I'm giving myself a pep talk. And I'm like, you're doing this for the right reasons. Practice you. It's okay. And when I got to back bends, there he was. And he was like, and I couldn't stand up. And he said, we'll do it together. And just helped me with every one of my back bends. And then just said, and actually said to me, after helping me stand up, because I couldn't stand up, and said to me, I know you practice whatever you're going to practice. Where do you practice? What do you want to do? And actually asked me those questions, basically said in his way, where do you go? And, and he said, just tomorrow, just go, just do. But after I'm like piecemealing these, it's not that different. We think it's so different, but what I was practicing wasn't that different. I just simply substituted a few, skipped a few, and could, needed help with a few. But it wasn't like, I'm not doing handstands in the middle of the room or like, or sticking it, like people aren't that, it's not that different. We think it's so different, but it's not. And there's a lot of room, even there in that room with him. And it was beautiful. And it was like the best experience I think it was one of the best experiences I've had. And it was because I was me. And I really did come as me and really did genuinely do what I felt was good for me in that moment, and appreciated the help and support that came my way. And that goes back to what you said, David, watch the way people teach, because the stories that come out of there are not that story, but that is the story.
Beautiful.
So maybe we ditch the question, or
We'll do a vote.
It's a good starting point and, exploration of what it means. What does it mean to do Ashtanga? What does it mean to do it well or right or good or best? What's the best version of it? And, you know, I think a lot of people rely on the discipline of the rigidity of it, and there is benefit to that, especially in the early stages, and especially if you're young and you're coming healthy. Like it really accentuates discipline and focus and all of these things in a very positive way, um, if the person is dedicated. And at the same time, to a different person seeing that, that's definitely not for me. I'm not that rigid. I'm not that disciplined. I'm not that willing to surrender to some sequence of whatever, who knows, any number of reasons. So the answer is back to where we started, which is it depends. Yeah. It depends.
that was good. I'm going to say that was a damn good David answer, and I'll take that one. Hey, thank you all.
Thank you, Peg.
This was fun.
Super nice to do this.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good to see you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. That was really nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was so nice to see everybody. Thank you.
As always, thanks so much for listening. And remember, you can watch these chats as well on the Ashtanga Dispatch YouTube page. Also, do us a favor and share this podcast with your friends on social media. You'd be doing them a favor then too. And if you're not yet on our email list, head on over to ashtangadispatch.com. Then you can have the latest podcast and writings delivered directly to you. Next up is some outside the box insight from maverick teachers Ty Landrum, David Grieg, and Harmony Slater. Thanks again, everyone.